千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let's get back into Tao Te Ching 24. As we looked at previously, the chapter title for 24 is To Disengage. As we have seen in our discussion last time, the disengaging is about the behaviors or the conduct of someone who is arrogant and expressing that arrogance in terms of flaunting, boasting, etc. So Lao Tzu takes the position that there are certain things in life that are not the Tao, that is, not the best way to live. Definitely expressing arrogance is in that category, and therefore is to be avoided, is to disengage oneself if you were to detect that you are engaging in such conduct. Last time, we went through the chapter to look at the sectional analysis, a relatively short chapter with only 9 lines, and looking at the repeating patterns in the characters, identifying them, noting the repetition, we're able to divide it up into 3 sections. There's an introductory section, the first 2 lines. The main section consists of the 4 different kinds of behaviors or thought process that results from arrogance. Then we have the final section, the conclusion, which is putting in no uncertain terms how Lao Tzu feels extremely averse to that kind of behavior. We began our discussion last time with the first section, lines 1 and 2. As you can see in this particular slide, line 1 is about standing on tiptoes. Line 2 translates to straddling, can also be translated to taking big steps. So these 2, tiptoeing and straddling, are meant to be metaphors for the expressions of arrogance and the fact that one cannot stand or walk when in that kind of position or taking that kind of action is a clue to us that showing off, trying to get attention, those would all be opposed to the Tao. So previously, we looked at this slide to summarize that particular idea. Both tiptoeing and straddling are unnatural. Unnatural way to stand and to walk respectively. The Tao is about the natural. The Tao is about flowing along with the course of nature in a way that is not contrived and completely unforced. And the second perspective on that is about the ability to last. With tiptoeing and straddling, no one can keep those up for long. Whereas the Tao is enduring. It withstands the test of time. It lasts. So that which cannot last cannot be congruent with the Tao. And in terms of the eventual outcome, with tiptoeing, you have to give that up, come back down, or stumble. With straddling, whether it's taking big steps or striking a pose with the legs wide apart, it's going to get tiring after a while. The Tao, on the other hand, is that which incorporates grace and balance into a harmonious existence. So in that way, it is also very different. Lastly, the motivation associated with those actions to raise oneself above others, to take big steps, is to draw attention. And the Tao is all about humility and authenticity. So this draws the contrast between that kind of behavior and the better way to live. We then went into the next section. There are 4 different kinds of behaviors or thought process that Lao Tzu talks about. We began by covering the first 2. The first one was those who flaunt themselves. And the second one was those who presume themselves. To flaunt is to show off, put oneself on a pedestal, on display. To presume, in this case, just means assuming that you are always right and everybody else is wrong. You know better than anybody else. That is the presumption. So these clearly, we can tell, are things that an arrogant person would think or do. We also cover the third item in the list of 4, and that was those who praise themselves. So definitely similar to the first 2, definitely related. And we talked about this as yet another manifestation of the ego. We also talked about the negative consequence of that. No merit. This was the slide where we ended our discussion last time. It is where Lao Tzu points out that self-praise will not result in real merits, real credit for the work that was done. And indeed, it gets you the very opposite. No credit, lack of merit. And as we talked about, it is yet another example where when you are going against the Tao, opposite to the flow of reality, it also results in you getting the opposite of what you might like. We all want recognition, for instance, and sometimes we deserve it. If we were to put ourselves on display, though, we may get the very opposite, the lack of recognition. One additional point to note is that sometimes self-praise, when you engage in praising yourself, that self-praise may not be blatant. It may not be obvious. It can disguise itself in various subtle ways. A lot of times, people will indirectly praise themselves by denigrating others. The idea is to elevate oneself by pushing others down. So, even when an arrogant person is not openly praising himself, he accomplishes a similar effect with criticism. Indeed, there is a story to illustrate this point. Once upon a time, in ancient China, there was a young man who came to visit the sage. This young man felt frustrated. He felt like he needed some advice. So he explained his problem to the sage. He said, "Master, it is my one wish in life to excel in the art of painting. So that is why I've been searching everywhere for someone that I can learn from. It's been years since I've been on this search, and I have located many reputable artists, but so far, I have not found anybody who can really teach me." The sage smiled at this and asked the young man, "What happened when you visited with these reputable artists?" The young man sighed to express his exasperation. He said, "I discovered most of them did not really deserve their attention. I looked at their paintings and I realized some of them were not even at my level." "I see," the sage said. "Since your skills far surpass theirs, would you honor me with a painting to commemorate this day?" So the young man was glad to hear this. He said, "Of course, master. The honor is mine. What would you like me to paint?" So the sage brought out brush, ink, and parchment, and the sage said, "How about a teapot and a teacup?" "Oh, easy." The young man was brimming with confidence, and he picked up the brush. With deft strokes of that brush, the young artist finished the painting quickly. As the sage requested, it depicted a teapot and a teacup next to it. So when he was done, the young man asked, "Master, does this painting meet with your approval?" The sage said, "Well, it is excellent, except the position of the teapot and teacup are reversed. It should be teacup on top and the teapot at the bottom." The young man laughed at this. Surely the master was making a joke. He said, "Master, you must be confused. How can the teapot pour tea into the teacup if the cup is positioned above the pot?" The sage smiled again. I see you understand the principle. You wish to receive the fragrant tea from the renowned master painters, and yet you position your teacup above their teapot. How then can you expect the tea to flow from them to you? The young man was stunned. He contemplated the words that the sage had spoken, and understanding began to dawn on him. The end. Let us delve in to the Tao. What was the truth that dawned on the young man? It was that his ego had gotten to him. He had been engaging in self-praise without being fully aware of it. This is the subtle kind of self-praise I mentioned. He had such a high opinion of his own artistic skills, but instead of saying it outright, he chose to express it in terms of not being able to find a suitably high-level teacher. This meant he did not have the maturity to realize that what he was doing achieved the opposite effect. He wanted to emphasize the merit of his abilities, but he succeeded only in exposing his lack of spiritual refinement. This was important because in the highest levels of art, the artist's spiritual state is a crucial part of the art. So with what we're studying, Tao Te Ching 24, Lao Tzu begins by saying those who are on tiptoes cannot stand. This applies to the young man as well, because he was, in effect, standing on tiptoes to try to raise himself above the level of all the established masters that he had met. His error was not in seeking mastery, but in believing mastery was a matter of comparison. Standing on tiptoes, I am a little higher than you. That kind of comparison. So that was the reason that he placed himself in opposition to those he wanted to learn from. He was basically measuring his own worth against theirs. He was not approaching with humility. So we know that true wisdom and growth, they can never come from showcasing the supposed superiority that you possess. Boasting will bring harm rather than benefit. Those who declare themselves to be the best, they only isolate themselves. They cut off the very learning that they are seeking. So all of this is the meaning of the words from Lao Tzu. Those who praise themselves have no merit. Or for the sage to point out, the young man's cup was above the teapot, pointing that out because he had inverted the relationship between student and teacher, not willing to lower his vessel, and as a result, receiving nothing. So that was the moment that he began to understand. He had to empty himself, position himself lower to be filled. The greatest artists of the world, they did not attain their skills through pride, but through quiet receptivity. To walk the path of mastery, one must be willing to listen, to absorb, and let go of personal pretense. So as the young man reflected on the sage's lesson, he saw with new eyes. The world, in fact, was full of teachers. Their wisdom had always been there, waiting for him. Their wisdom was not to be poured into a stubbornly closed cup, but to flow freely when you go to them with a sincere heart. So there was never any need for the young man to engage in any kind of self-praise, directly or indirectly. In this way, the young man was transformed by the sage's words. When he took up his brush again, it was no longer with arrogance, but with reverence. So that is the end of the story and the Tao. It is why, as another reminder, Lao Tzu wrote, "Those who praise themselves have no merit." We can now move on to the next line. Line 6, it says, "Those who boast about themselves do not last." So this is, as I said, the last of the 4 lines. It is an certain things don't last. And this is because sages have long noted the prevalence of those who boast in the world. It is part of human nature. It's prevalent in ancient times as today. At any time in history, in any culture, we would always find many who like to boast. They come and go because they do not last. And this transience is the way it has always been and will probably always be. It is a pattern that keeps repeating itself. And that pattern has the person who boasts showing up, causing a splash, initially getting some attention. But then they expose their shortcoming for everyone to see. And after that, they are quickly forgotten. And that's what I mean when I say they come and go. And this applies to us in our lives. We see this at the workplace, in our social circles, and everywhere else. There are many examples. At the workplace, we may see someone who's trying to take all the credit, and this has a negative impact on collaboration and morale. In our social circles, with friends and acquaintances, we also come across people who boast. They expect validation. They want to be seen as special. This impacts the influence that they have, their popularity, the support they get, the connections they can make. So such people, we know, they do not usually regard what they say as being boastful. There is a lack of self-awareness in the same way that the young man did not initially realize that he was praising himself. Usually, those who boast, they have a highly inflated opinion of themselves. So, what others will perceive as boasting or bragging, they think of it as just a factual statement. So that is what we need to watch out for as well. When we engage in it, we may not be aware of it. So boasting and self-praise, these are both actions to avoid. This is a consistent emphasis in the Tao Te Ching. It is a warning that is spread throughout the totality of the Tao Te Ching. And we're just looking at 24 now, but later on, we will also see the following similar warning against boasting and flaunting. In Tao Te Ching 30, it says, achieve results, but does not brag. Achieves results, but does not flaunt. So, if we recall to mind the chapter previous to this, 23, it was the metaphors of strong wind and sudden rain. So we can make the connection that the wind and rain can be metaphoric, that when those weather manifestations don't stop, they're like somebody who cannot stop talking about himself or his achievements. So, as I said, a consistent message throughout the Tao Te Ching. Here, there is another point that we can extract out of this. All this talk about not flaunting, not boasting, etc., sometimes gets mixed up with a misunderstanding about Wu Wei, mistranslated as inaction. So the misunderstanding is that Tao cultivators would refrain from doing anything, become passive, and therefore have nothing to brag or to flaunt. As we can see in these two lines, specifically Lao Tzu says that someone with the Tao achieves results, but does not brag or flaunt. In other words, Tao cultivators will take action, will get things done, achieve results, but quietly, without fanfare. So that is the way of the Tao, not passivity, not apathy. Then we go to the last two characters translated as do not last. This is important because those who boast about themselves, they expect that they will get respect, they will gain influence, and the success that they are boasting about will continue on indefinitely. However, reality turns out to be quite the opposite. Number one, boasting breeds resentment and undermines respect from others. Number two, the lack of respect will decrease the influence that you can exert on other people. And number three, overconfidence leads to missteps. We've all seen this many times. So these ideas become a Tao position against arrogance. It's one of the primary themes that is weaved into the Tao Te Ching from beginning to end. Why is it repeated in that manner? Because it is one of the most difficult lessons in life. The mastery of one's ego is one of the primary challenges that people face in spiritual cultivation. And that's why it is so important to be especially vigilant and especially aware, especially when you and I engage in it ourselves. We have to then take our cue from the title of this chapter and disengage. So, to really drive home the point Lao Tzu is trying to make about arrogant behaviors, I would like to lay them out and show expectations versus reality. What I mean is, what the arrogant person does, the results that he expects, as opposed to what he gets. So this slide is called Arrogance, Assumptions versus Actuality. We have the manifestations of arrogance on the left-hand column. Then assumption, that is what the arrogant person expects by engaging in those thoughts or actions. Then finally, the column on the right is the actuality of it, what they actually get. So first, we have flaunting as a manifestation of the ego. So, of course, we know just from experience that the purpose of flaunting is to direct the spotlight to oneself. So the assumption is that by flaunting, you will gain a higher profile. You will get more visibility. You expect to be seen as special. You expect to receive admiration and respect. What about the actuality? Well, you end up being regarded as just another show-off. You reveal yourself as being needy or desperate for attention. So the opposite of what one would like. The second manifestation of arrogance is those who presume, the presumption of correctness. So the arrogant person thinks his views should be regarded as clearly superior to others. That is the expectation. Superior opinions regarded as such, held as such by everybody. So this person thinks those who disagree with him obviously don't know any better. The actuality? Well, people look at him and all they see is a pompous individual, self-righteous. And they don't pay that much attention. They don't think that he is distinguished because pomposity is very common. And rather than to point out any flaws in his opinions, people may just turn away. They may not want to say anything. But whatever they do, the reality is that the superior person who thought of himself that way, the person who assumes his own superiority, is not seen as distinguished at all. Quite the opposite. Next, we have those who praise themselves. Self-praise. When somebody engages in praising himself, the expectation is that it will be recognized. The merits will be widely recognized by everybody. Now, you and I know just from real life experience what happens when we see somebody who does that. Everybody has a natural dislike of self-praise. And whatever good was actually done by this arrogant person can be discounted or discarded. Therefore, that's why I say self-praise short-circuits any merits. What people remember is not the accomplishment, the merit, or the credit, but the attempt to compensate for insecurity, and therefore no merit. Lastly, we have those who boast. The assumption of this person who's boasting is that the success they are boasting about will continue. But sooner or later, the house of cards will collapse. The arrogant person will stumble. There's nobody around to help him get back up. So, actuality is failure and disgrace. This person cannot last in terms of being seen as a success. So this is why Lao Tzu says the negative consequences of those who flaunt, presume, praise themselves, or boast is that they end up not clearly seen, not distinguished, not worthy of merit, and they cannot last. So, as I mentioned, because of the importance of this particular lesson, arrogance versus humility, it's repeated. And in fact, there are two chapters that are closely related. 24, this one being one of them. The other one is 2 chapters ago, 22. So I think it will shed some light if I were to lay them out side by side so that we can compare them. So 道德经 22, it says, without flaunting themselves, and so are seen clearly, without presuming themselves, and so are distinguished, without praising themselves, and so have merit, without boasting about themselves, and so are lasting. These are very similar to what we're studying now in 24. Many of the characters are repeated and there is a one-to-one correspondence. 4 lines. In 24, it is, those who flaunt themselves are not clear. Those who presume themselves are not distinguished. Those who praise themselves have no merit, and those who boast about themselves do not last. So you can tell when we set them side by side in this manner that these are just different ways of saying the exact same thing. 22 shows what happens when you do not engage in these harmful practices that are stemming from the ego. In 24, the current chapter, it shows what happens when you do engage in such practices. Each one of these lines has the same sentence structure to all the others in the same group. Each occurrence is divided into arrogant thoughts versus arrogant actions. Here's what I mean by that. For both 22 and 24, the first two lines about flaunting and presumptions, these are all originated in the mind. These are thoughts regarding oneself. So what happens when you flaunt is because you hold these overinflated opinions about yourself. So that's in the mind. The second line there, the presumption of correctness, that is because you have the same overinflated opinions about your views, that you are more correct than anybody else. So these both have a lot to do with the mind. Then for the third and fourth lines, we have manifestations not in the mind, but taken into action in our interactions with other people as we live our lives. To praise yourself, self-praise, is something that you do in the presence of other people. And same with boasting. So the distinctions here is the yin and yang complementary duality, where yin is the internal manifestation, while the yang is the external. So the last point is to combine both styles of expression to draw conclusions. We can tell flaunting and to be seen clearly, to be perceived, they are diametrically opposite. One excludes the other. You cannot have both. Same with the presumption of correctness and being distinguished. They're just not compatible with each other. It has to be one or the other. And you can apply this to praising yourself as well. They are opposed. Praising yourself, you've got no merit. Refrain from praising yourself, you end up with merit. Because something good that you have done, the praise is coming from other sources. And lastly, boasting and being able to last are also in opposition. You can only get lasting respect if you are not someone who's boasting. The one who does boast cannot have that. So this is an area in life that I know a lot of people are already aware of. That is, people don't like when they perceive somebody as arrogant. However, that awareness may not translate into changes of actions for many. When people look at this, they may say, oh, I already know this stuff. I know I should not be arrogant because being arrogant is not good for me. But then you see them engaging in one of the four behaviors noted here. It is because people tend to see others more clearly than they can see themselves. That's why we have to emphasize, we have to repeat. The purpose in the Tao is that you and I will recall this lesson to mind when we are in various life situations. And that's how we can turn that awareness into the Tao of humility. We're now ready to go into line 7. Line 7 says, those with the Tao call such things leftover, food, or tumors. So let's tackle this line first by looking at the first part of it. Those with the Tao. This includes the sages, their disciples or students, and all the Tao cultivators. Now, this excludes certain people as well. Let me explain. First, the aversion to arrogance is a defining characteristic for those who are with the Tao. It is entirely possible for someone to have knowledge of the Tao without being with the Tao. What do I mean by that? As an example, the people who study the Tao purely as an academic subject. To them, the Tao is something to be analyzed and dissected, the subject of papers with citations across the broad history of Chinese literature. They may not see the Tao as something that would be their way of life, but a subject of pure academic study. They would not necessarily have an aversion to arrogance as a defining characteristic. Yet another type of individuals would be the people who read upon the Tao as a hobby, as a philosophy to contemplate, without ever using the Tao in real life. So the Tao for them is something to think about, but not something to do. So that will be at odds with what Lao Tzu means by those with the Tao. For those who actually are with the Tao, the more they study, the more they align with humility in a natural way. This is so consistently true that it can be used as a measure of someone's level of spiritual refinement. And please note, when I say naturally humble, I'm not talking about someone who's polite and speaking in a courteous way. It is someone who is unassuming, someone who does not even have any trace of arrogance in them. And in my life, I've been very fortunate to study under masters who are exactly that way. These are practical, extremely wise individuals who are just themselves. They're transparent, they are direct, no arrogance whatsoever, and they become so incredibly admired and respected because of that. And we say that they have a virtuous nature. So in the traditional Tao setting, you say that someone who has that attainment to have 德性, a virtuous nature. It's powerful and has to be experienced. It is something that I admire and that I aspire to myself. So the aspiration for such people is to maintain the balance of confidence and humility. Being confident and being humble are not in opposition with each other. We talked about a whole bunch of things that are in opposition, like flaunting and being seen clearly, but this is not that. Indeed, Tao cultivators realize that confidence and humility can work hand in hand. In the proper balance, there's no excess ego, no excess pride or hubris. True humility in the Tao is based on clear self-perception. That perception of yourself includes your capabilities and your current limitations. To be aware of your own current capabilities, that awareness gives you confidence. You have the certain knowledge of what you can do, of what you know, what you are sure about. You can rely on yourself and be very self-sufficient in those particular areas. And then the perception or the awareness of your own limitations, it gives you receptivity, a willingness, curiosity, eagerness to learn. It is a mindset that will be completely absent in the arrogant person. So, with those two, with the clear perception there, it leads to a synergistic combination where you can be very confident and yet very humble at the same time. Let's continue to explore the rest of this line, starting with the second half there, where it's talking about leftover food. Here, I want to be careful to note the ancient context is different than in modern times when it comes to leftover food. How so? Well, think about what happens for you and me when we have food that we cannot finish. In modern times, saving leftover food is easy. It's actually taken for granted. What you and I would do is just to put it away in the refrigerator. We do that without a second thought. When we do that, we're not thinking about how refrigerators are a recent invention in human history. For most of human history, refrigerators did not exist. There was no easy way to put food away and expect that it will keep. So this is certainly the case in ancient times. People had much less ability to preserve the leftover food, a lot less options. So lacking refrigeration, we know leftover food, it cannot last, it can easily spoil. So because they knew that it would soon be spoiled, leftover food must be discarded, and therefore were seen in the same light as trash. Something that you don't want to keep around. If we were to consume spoiled food, it can make us sick. It's a much stronger connection to garbage than we typically associate with in modern times. So because of that, this connection with the perception about trash and garbage and things to be discarded, that's what makes it a good metaphor for things like self-praise and boasting. Just like consuming spoiled food can make us sick, engaging in arrogant behaviors, we can create problems for ourselves. Excessive self-praise will backfire. It will cause other people to view the person who's praising himself as less likable. We know this because we've all seen it. Boasting, likewise, frequently interpreted by just about everybody as a sign of insecurity, not confidence. So, there's every reason in the world for us to think of it just like Lao Tzu, as something to be discarded, something that we should not keep around. And now, the last part of this line. Translated as tumors in this line, those with the Tao call such things leftover food or tumors. Breaking these characters down separately, these two characters start with the character for extraneous and then the character for shape. So literally describing a tumor as an extraneous growth, a shape on your body that is abnormal, that is a sign of a health issue. Let me note, as a translator, that some versions of the Tao Te Ching, it is written with a different character as the last character pronounced the same, Xing. This is because in ancient times, in classical Chinese, back in those days, 2,500 years ago, the two characters pronounced the same, Xing, they were synonymous with each other. They meant the same thing, shape, growth, and therefore put extraneous in front of it, that's a tumor. As language progresses and evolves, meanings will change and evolve in time as well. So, in modern times, one of the two characters still means shape, while the other has lost that meaning and just means travel or action. This is why a translator who knows modern Mandarin but not ancient Chinese, looking at this line, will mistranslate the two characters as extraneous travel instead of extraneous shape. So, arrogant behavior is then regarded as leftover food, like unnecessary food, or extraneous travel, unnecessary travel. It makes less sense in the context of this chapter. We're going to stick to the correct meaning, which is leftover food or tumors, things that are harmful to us. Now, as I mentioned, the ancients knew that when you have this abnormal growth, that is not a good thing. Tumors were not a good sign. So the appearance of a tumor, symptomatic of an underlying sickness, and if untreated, it can lead to severe consequences, including death. And it is the same with arrogant thoughts. Arrogant thoughts and expressions can be symptomatic of an underlying sickness, not of the body, but of the mind. And if you don't do anything about it, if they are untreated, arrogant thoughts and expressions can lead to severe consequences to your life. So let me lay them out in this format like a table so they can be seen very clearly. Tumor, we know, an unnatural growth. So arrogance, How can that be seen as something that is not natural? Well, because to be arrogant is to be contrary to your natural humility. Remember, as kids, as children, we were all receptive, curious, eager to learn about the world. We did not mind not knowing something. As kids, we asked questions. Our approach to the world was that we were eager, willing, receptive to learn. That is the essence of being humble. We're here to learn something that we do not know. As we get older, we feel like we need to put on airs, like we know everything. And that's the beginning of arrogance. It's not our original nature. Second thing about tumors, as I said, symptomatic of underlying illness in one's body, and metaphorically speaking, arrogance is symptomatic of underlying issue in one's mind, like overinflated self-opinion, delusions of grandeur, and tumors will lead to serious problems in one's health. In the same way, arrogance leads to more problems down the road in your life journey. So this is all about arrogance being a distorted concept of self-importance. The ego becomes too big. We know a physical tumor can block crucial bodily functions. It can block circulation. Tumor of the mind can also impede the flow of your spiritual energies, your Tao. Next line, line 8. This is the second from the last line. Lao Tzu writes, they despise them. So singling out the last two characters there, two characters, the very last character is them, and the character before that is dislike or hate. So the meaning is animosity, to feel this intense loathing for them. And when we say them, we're talking about flaunting, presuming correctness, praising oneself, and boasting. So here's what we can get out of this. In the Tao, sages will not hesitate to point out what to avoid. This is because they understand that although the great Tao encompasses all, the good, the bad, the indifferent, everything, when we are in this journey of life, we still have to choose the best possible path for ourselves. And that's the Tao too. So just like the sages, Lao Tzu is also not one to shy away from expressing his strong objections against the things that will cause us a lot of problems, like arrogance. I want to highlight this because, contrary to what some people may believe, the idea that there's no good or bad is not part of the teachings of Lao Tzu. In modern times, sometimes we hear people say, there's no good and bad, but only thinking makes it so. Okay, I recognize that is a philosophical outlook that many people have. But in the Tao, sages and Lao Tzu will say this is the right way to go, and that's not the right way to go. They have definite ideas. To them, to the sages, and also to Lao Tzu. There's no, well, it depends. Well, it's all perspectives. They they are not vague like that. They are very clear. Now, looking at this line in totality, they despise them. It leaves no doubt that Lao Tzu has strong feelings against self-importance, thinking about oneself as being above others, like tiptoeing, metaphorically speaking, or self-promotion, talking about oneself in glowing terms, like taking big steps to attract attention. So Lao Tzu is saying that, well, many people engage in both, but they are despicable. And this is sort of a paradox of human nature. Even arrogant people who engage in arrogant actions, even them, they don't like it if they have to listen to the self-praise of somebody else. If they do it, it's fine. But then they also dislike it because such things are naturally found repulsive by everybody. And that's because these actions are out of harmony with the natural order, and that's why they get generally rejected. Last line. Thus, those who possess the Tao do not engage in them. So to break this down, I want to focus on those who possess the Tao. There are three characters, 有道者. The pinyin is a little confusing, but it sounds like 有道者. Literally, the first character means to have. The second character there, well, that's easy to recognize. That's just the character for the Tao. And then the final character there, the third character, those who, he who, she who, they who. So the meaning, we can tell, those who possess the Tao within. So our takeaway is that real understanding of the Tao, it has to include mastery of the ego. And therefore, this term is not just the people that have mastered the Tao, like sages or advanced cultivators, but everybody who is really studying and applying the Tao. And lastly, we have two characters translated as not engage in them. Literally, we have a character for no or not, and then the last character is to abide, to position, to dwell, to not abide by the dictates of arrogance is to reject it for oneself. This rejection comes from the clarity of thoughts and perceptions. This is what leads to the resolve to never engage in actions like flaunting or boasting. So remember, the clarity we're talking about here is the perception of arrogance as being equivalent to leftovers, like trash to be discarded, or tumors, the harmful growth. So looking at this line together, there are two aspects of it, the internal and the external. Again, the yin and yang duality, the complementary duality. So the internal, those with the Tao develop this internal natural aversion to arrogance. External is that in daily life, it manifests as a humble composure that is unforced. So what we're saying is that the aversion of arrogance becomes the way that people are naturally when they study and understand the Tao. For them to be humble requires no reminder whatsoever. They just are. And when we say humble composure as an external manifestation, it's a feeling that somebody has an aura of being very peaceful, because the natural humility of the Tao is connected to non-contention. So that peace is natural too. It also manifests in everything that such people do. It is consistent in all of their interactions. In modern times, this means not just face-to-face interactions, but also online. And let me note that some people do have a different online persona than real life. The anonymous nature of the online experience can bring out the worst in some, so that a person who may be quiet and reserved in real life can become bombastic, can become rather arrogant in the online interactions. So this notion, just a reminder, it's not the idea that somebody who's very spiritual loves everything, dislikes nothing. The notion that spiritual person embraces all, even the things that people don't like. Because of this distinction, I want to talk about the steps to disengage from arrogance as a process, one step at a time. This is how it looks from the Tao perspective. First, study the Tao. When you study the Tao with sincerity, you become aligned to it. And Lao Tzu says that you are with the Tao. This leads to number 2, increasing clarity in thoughts and perceptions. To be aligned with the Tao, the alignment makes everything to come into clearer and sharper focus. It's the way you think, the way you look at the world. In that clarity, you will note there are many instances where people's arrogant behaviors cause them to have a negative ending. So the arrogant behaviors bring about the opposite of what such people are looking for, like recognition, merit, genuine achievements, lasting success. It is only the opposite of arrogant behaviors, manifestations of being humble, that actually leads to all of those things that one might wish for in life. So then this leads to number 3, which is realization. The clarity of thoughts and perceptions will naturally, logically lead to your realization that arrogance is not really that different from leftovers or tumors. It becomes obvious. So there's no place for arrogance in your life. You don't want to be eating spoiled leftover food. Even the thought of that brings revulsion. And you don't want tumors either. It's most alarming. And you don't want flaunting, boasting, etc. to be the tumors of the spirit or tumors of the mind, tumors as serious problems with your cultivation. So where does this lead? To manifestation. This is a natural aversion to arrogance that we've been talking about for several slides. Having that realization, you can transcend beyond what a lot of people are still engaging in. So here, what we're saying is that the Tao is not just in your mind, but also in your heart. It's not just the way you think or look at the world, but what you do. Your natural aversion will guide not just thoughts, but all your actions. And this applies to everybody in your sphere of influence. Family, work, social life, everybody you encounter as you go through your daily existence, just people in general. Some of them may not be your family members or coworkers or friends, but you approach them with the exact same humbleness. And as I mentioned, today, this extends online as well. In general, the more we look at this, the more we understand, the more important it becomes, the more central it becomes in our lives. With this view of the process, we're ready to conclude with a look at everything that we have learned in this chapter together in one image. So this is the conclusion to the entire Tao Te Ching 24. It's a diagram that will summarize the ideas that Lao Tzu has expressed to us. It'll show all the manifestations of arrogance and how they are compatible with the positive effects that we might want. To the left, I have a podium with a spotlight on it. This represents the craving of the ego to be seen and heard by everybody. So the left side of this slide includes all the people who do not really know the Tao, who are not really with the Tao. So driven by the cravings, they resort to flaunting, and they may say, well, I want the spotlight to shine on me so everybody can see me. And they're driven to their presumptions of correctness. And what they're saying here is, you should all listen to me because you know I'm right. Then they also engage in self-praise. Look at this amazing job I have done. And lastly, they may engage in boasting. I am the best. No one else can even come close. So this can, I think we can already identify some experience that we've had that are similar to what is being shown here. To the right-hand side, I have the yin and yang symbol to represent the Tao. So the Tao is quite different from what we see on the left. From the Tao perspective, to be seen clearly, it means that you must not be flaunting yourself. The thinking is that, well, people will notice if I have done something good. People who do not know the Tao wish to be seen, but when they hog the spotlight, they make them the same as all the others who crave attention, and that's why nobody pays a lot of attention to them. And the second one there, distinguished in the Tao perspective. And the thinking is that, well, I listen more than I talk, and that makes me different. and distinguished. Those who presume themselves to be correct, they want to be distinguished too. But their aggressive assertions make them no different from all the others who aren't listening because they're right about everything. They feel like they deserve the recognition that they are right. Next, we have merit. And the thinking from the Tao perspective is that people will credit me if what I have done is something good that impacts them in a positive way. Those who praise themselves feel like they deserve credit or merit, but then the self-praise will mark them as unfit for any kind of credit or merit. Lastly, we have lasting. That which is congruent to the Tao is that which will last. Here, the perspective that is Tao-centric is that I prefer to let my work speak for itself. That is how I keep the trust and respect of the people, so the influence that I have, the success that I have enjoyed will last. Putting all of these together, the conclusion is that those who possess the Tao will always refrain from thinking, saying, or doing anything driven by the ego. And in this way, they naturally avoid sabotaging themselves as they move forward. Or as Lao Tzu says, those who possess the Tao do not engage in them. So this concludes our line-by-line analysis and discussion of this chapter. We're now ready to move on to the paraphrase. As we have seen, there are 3 sections in 24. The first section is about the tiptoeing and the straddling. Here is the paraphrase I want to offer. Those who stand on tiptoes cannot do so for long. And those who stand with legs wide apart cannot walk. In the same way, those who try to raise their profile cannot keep it up indefinitely. And those who do too much to attract attention cannot make progress in life. That's the first section. We move on to section 2, which is the central section with the 4 manifestations of arrogance. So here is the paraphrase for the section. The more people try to make themselves seem special, the more they achieve the very opposite. The one who shows off ends up just like all other show-offs and cannot be seen clearly. The one who tries to impress others as a know-it-all ends up looking like a know-nothing. The one who tries to take the credit and praise ends up with little credit and no praise. The one who brags about himself ends up exposed as a braggart. This is the pattern that egotism follows throughout history and all over the world. It always fails and never lasts. And now, moving on to the final section about the leftover food, the tumors, and to not engage in what we have just seen. Here is a paraphrase. Those who study the Tao understand how excessive pride leads to failure. They look at arrogance as being no different from garbage or tumor, something that should be regarded with complete contempt. They will know that they have mastered the Tao when they no longer engage in the egocentric behavior of flaunting, presuming, self-praise, and boasting. So there we have the paraphrase for the final section. So for the very last part of our discussion on 24, we'll look at the last line and reference it back to the first line for the full circle. In the very last line of Tao Te Ching 24, Lao Tzu says, those with the Tao will not engage in arrogant conduct, which they despise. We link this back to the beginning and see the metaphors of standing on tiptoes and straddling. Just by connecting the two, it's clear. Tao cultivators see trying to elevate oneself and taking exaggerated steps as against the Tao or contrary to the Tao. This therefore reinforces the message in real life terms that someone who knows the Tao prefers keeping a low profile, an open mind, and a humble heart. So I want to reiterate the very last line. Thus, those who possess the Tao do not engage in them. And now you know exactly what's consisting of them. Now for the summary. Previously, last time, we went through 3 out of the 4 things that are manifestations or behaviors or conduct of the ego or arrogance. Today, we also covered the 4th, which was boasting. And what we have learned, what Lao Tzu says, is that those who boast cannot last. The interpretation for that is any success becomes temporary at best. There's other implications, like the respect that you have from people, the influence that you can have within the group. Those cannot last for the person who boasts. And today, for the last section, with the leftovers and the tumors, what it says is that we all have the task to develop our critical faculties, the ability to tell right from wrong, good from bad, because the Tao has definite ideas about what is the better way to go and what is not quite so good. In this light, there can be no question, arrogance is simply bad for us. So, having developed our critical faculties, we need to use our critical faculties. We want to observe other people and recognize arrogance, whether it's boasting or self-praise or the other stuff. Not only that, we have to turn the gaze inward and reflect and recognize arrogance within ourselves. Are there times when we don't even realize that we're engaging in self-praise or boasting or flaunting? It's quite possible. Lastly, we must manage our thoughts and behaviors And leftover food, tumors, it just means we have to regard arrogance with the appropriate level of contempt, recognizing them as bad. They can do nothing good for us. We should not even have any of it sitting around. And lastly, we have to resolve to refrain from engaging in arrogant actions ourselves. That's the ultimate measure. Does it change your life? Does it change what you do or what you say? And this concludes Tao Te Ching 24. Share the Tao. The easiest way to access Tao resources is to visit my author website, dereklin.com. There, you can click on links and go to the webpage where you will find everything listed, such as Taoism.net with information about the Tao and also about this meeting. Our Facebook community where you can ask questions or discuss your thoughts on the Tao with others. Our YouTube channel where you can watch recordings of all our previous meetings. My Amazon author page where you can find books and audiobooks for your continuing exploration. You can also go directly with the web address dereklin.com/links, as you can see. You can use these resources to share the Tao with the people you know who may be interested. When you see the benefits of Tao cultivation in your life, you can share your experience with others through your comments in Facebook or YouTube. If you find my books or audiobooks to be helpful, you can post your reviews on Amazon to help others discover the Tao. This is the path that I am on. So I can say sharing the Tao has benefited me personally in every aspect of life. I would like to invite you to come along with me to share the Tao. Let us travel together on the path in the journey of life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.